to day 3 of Women's Health Week. Today it's all about putting the me into mental health. So we're here talking to one of our Women's Health Week ambassadors, registered psychologist and former Olympian, Caroline Anderson. Welcome, Caroline.
Oh, thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Yes, Caroline is a former Olympian in Taekwondo, so she can speak very authoritatively about mind and body when it comes to mental wellness and how the two interact. But we're going to start off talking about, well, results from our survey, actually. Almost half of our survey respondents said they had been diagnosed with depression or anxiety by a doctor. And so, Caroline, I wanted to ask you, why do you think this figure is so high, and why are younger women aged 18 to 50 most affected?
Yeah, it's quite a shocking statistic, isn't it?
I think this figure is so high, and why are younger women aged 18 to 50 most affected?
Yeah, it's quite a shocking statistic, isn't it? And it's wonderful that the survey was able to pick this up. I guess there's a lot of factors, and some of the factors are quite complex. But I guess one of the things is that what we know, and I guess the whole point of this year's Women's Health Week is that women do tend to put others first. You know, we are the primary carers in the family. We do tend to do a lot of caring for other people. But what that can mean is sometimes our mental health and health in general can suffer. In terms of some of the other factors, I think women can be at risk in terms of, you know, that whole child rearing age bracket. So women can be more at risk of depression and anxiety in the perinatal period or postnatal period due to the hormonal changes and the demands and the difficulties in raising, you know, young babies and families. Not only that, things like infertility issues may also mean that depression and anxiety is something that women can experience. Other factors would be things like women experiencing domestic violence, relationship issues, and I think also just that women tend to, you know, put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do it all. So we do want to raise a family and do the best job that we can, but also we've got the demands of a career and, you know, earning money for the family and things like that. So I think all those things mean that women can experience depression and anxiety.
Yeah. Well, we just talked about some of the triggers there, obviously.
Yes,
but can we, I guess, speak even, maybe get down to specifics about what are some of the triggers for, like feeling irritable, frustrated and anxious?
Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly in the 21st century?
Yes, absolutely. So those emotions that you just highlighted, those things that you just highlighted, are obviously emotional states. And being a psychologist, I guess I like to think about external triggers and internal factors that may contribute to those emotional states. I guess when we're talking about emotions, we have to remember that emotions can be triggered by or interact with our thoughts and mindsets and beliefs that we have. So if our mindset or our thoughts are centered around you know, worst case scenarios and, you know, what if this happens, and predicting sort of, and sometimes this happens in life, we kind of want to predict, we want to know the certainty of the outcome. Obviously we're having those kinds of thoughts be rather anxiety provoking. In terms of irritability and frustration, you know, irritability and frustration can occur when we're having thoughts around not feeling like we're meeting our own expectations or reaching our goals, or I guess when things aren't going quite our way, can contribute to those feelings. I guess the other thing is that stress is going to impact or trigger those kind of emotional states. So stress is, I guess, when we feel like we can't manage the demands of the situation, we're going to feel that stress, which is going to release cortisol and I guess some activation in the sympathetic nervous system, which is going to make us feel stressed and also going to potentially make us feel irritable or anxious or frustrated.
Yeah, I guess one of the things with stress as well that we did talk about this week is that stress can also be a motivator. And you, as a former athlete, would understand that you kind of need a little bit of stress to motivate yourself. But at what point does stress become a problem?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. So stress is absolutely, or arousal levels is another way of describing it. We need that adrenaline and cortisol to get the best out of our performance. Otherwise, we're a bit sort of lackluster, don't really care about performance or about what we're doing. So absolutely, I think having some degree of stress is really important. And new research has also shown around the way in which we interpret stress is really interesting. So different people can experience the same level of stress in different ways. Some people can find it quite energizing and I don't know if exciting is the quite word, but motivating.
Okay, so some people get an adrenaline rush, other people might feel panicked.
Very threatened and panicked by it. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I guess that the approach that we take to high demand situations is really important. Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. So for people that might have issues with those feelings rather than being sort of energized by them, when we feel those emotions coming on, how can we be aware of them and cope with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to think about is developing that insight in understanding to our emotions. So as psychologists, we really like to talk about the connection between our thoughts, feelings and behaviours. So the connection between what we're thinking, how that makes us feel, and also what we then feel like we're going to do as a result of those feelings. I think the other thing to think about is about just developing that sort of broader context and broader understanding of what's actually happening for us. And like we said, what the triggers are. So are they internal factors? Are they external factors like busy modern lifestyle and technology and high pressure, high demand? Or are they more our internal sort of thoughts and feelings that are contributing? In terms of what else we can do about when feelings, are around, like anxiety or frustration. As a psychologist, I do a lot of work with people about helping them figure out some tools and strategies of how to manage those things. So the first thing that I like to talk about is about learning to have a different relationship with our thoughts. So we call that kind of unhooking from our thoughts. A lot of the time when we have anxious thoughts or frustrating or irritable thoughts, we get really sort of pulled in and sucked in by those thoughts. And we also tend to believe our thoughts. We tend to think that they're telling us the truth, which sometimes, sure, they are, and sometimes thoughts can be really helpful. Yeah. But what we find is when those uncomfortable feelings are coming up, sometimes those thoughts are not particularly helpful.
Okay. And so we lose our sense of objectivity, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So perspective taking and viewing a situation from a different perspective can be really important. So other things that we can do is learn to sit with that discomfort of those emotions. So we call that acceptance in psychology. And it means accepting the emotional states. Emotions come and go, and emotions are natural human experiences, and they can't harm us. And I think taking the fear away from some of those emotions is really important. Understanding that we can let emotions come and go, we can sort of sit with them and open up to them rather than always sort of trying to push them away or being quite frightened by them.
Okay, so it's not so much a matter of control, but a matter of learning how to live with them and find good relationships.
That's a lovely way of describing it. Yeah, absolutely. I guess other things that we can do, and the things that I work with my clients around, are around identifying what matters more. So what are our values and purpose, and to be guided in our action based on our values and purpose, rather than sort of listening to those anxious thoughts or getting caught up in those anxious or worrying feelings. Yeah, so they're the kinds of things that I think are really important.
Yeah, okay. Well, when you actually sort of sit down with somebody, do you have like a toolkit yourself you go to? Do you have like a 5 top tips that you can advise somebody to help them nurture their mental well-being, as a starting point?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So in terms of probably the first place I would start, I would think about just general health. So, I mean, I know you guys at June House talk a lot about general health, and obviously nutrition and diet is important. Sleep is probably one of the most important things that are linked to our well-being, health, just that sense of recovery for our body and for our mind, but also the importance of exercise. So when we exercise, when we get out, outdoors or out in nature, just that release of serotonin and endorphins is such an important aspect that can help our well-being and mental health. And so that sort of would start there, but there's many other things that I could think about. I'd probably say next would be mindfulness. mindfulness is a really hot topic.
Yeah.
Lots of people now know about it, whereas probably 5-10 years ago, probably less so. But
yeah, it was actually one of our topics for Women's Health Week last year too.
Absolutely, yeah. It's gaining a lot of attention, and the reason why is there's now so much evidence to say that it can be beneficial when we sort of cultivate that mindset of learning to slow things down, learn to pay more attention to the moment, and sort of practice developing that parasympathetic nervous system response.
What is the parasympathetic nervous system?
So I guess it's the best way of sort of changing or reducing the stress response. So the stress response is when our amygdala is sending the message in our brain to the hypothalamus, saying danger or a threatening situation. So that's where we get the release of the cortisol and adrenaline in our system. And that can be quite wearing and tearing and damaging on our system over time. So if we learn to actively cultivate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of that, it's going to sort of start to undo some of that damage, I guess. It's a way of sort of recovery for our body, I guess, is the best way, and for our mind, the best way of describing it. So mindfulness can be a really important aspect of that.
Do you practice it yourself?
Oh, that's a really good question. Look, I feel like because I talk to my clients about it, I feel like I kind of, it reminds me to, and I feel like I do, but I don't feel like it's important to do hours upon hours every day. I talk to my clients about 2 minutes, taking a few deep breaths, thinking about times of transitional moments when we can take those few deep breaths, reflect on what's happening in our body, engaging our senses. So probably when I go do my exercise, I go running or walking is probably when I really try, or even swimming, I try to engage that part of my mind. Or sometimes at night time if I'm having trouble sleeping, as we all do from time to time, I'll definitely try to practice that myself.
So exercise for you is a part of your mental well-being?
Try to. Look, I've got young kids and it can be really hard to find the time, but being a former athlete, it's something that I miss, and I feel like it's just such an important part, so I'll try to fit it in wherever I can. In terms of some more of those tips, I'd also say the next one will be developing self-compassion. I think that as humans, we are incredibly self-critical. We all have that kind of inner self, that inner critical voice telling us it's not good enough, or to do it better, or we should be doing this. And I think it's such an important thing to think about how we can have a different conversation with ourselves, and learning to cultivate that. And I think it's probably one of the, just from personal experience, it's probably one of the hardest things that clients do find, is learn just to change the narrative a little bit, speak to themselves in a slightly different way, and
to be your own best friend.
Absolutely. And I think often if I say to a client or anyone, would you say that to your friend? No, of course not. Well, what would you say? Oh, well, I'd say it's okay, or you're doing a great job. But we don't tend to say those things to ourselves, which I think we can learn to do. And as women, I think it's really important to do that.
Well, that's what we're really trying to encourage women to do this week, to be kind to themselves and put themselves first, which is first step towards being kind to yourself. And as mothers in particular are really bad at doing that, do you find?
I have definitely learned over the years, it's still a challenge, but it's a work in progress. I have to work on all these things myself, and it's really difficult, but I think we sort of have to push ourselves, because otherwise our health and our well-being does suffer. Absolutely.
Well, we touched on your exercise before, how you still do that. I mean, I'm sure, being a former professional athlete, I'm sure you've had a whole toolbox of strategies to keep yourself in top shape mentally. So what did you do when you were an athlete, and what do you still do to nurture your own mental well-being?
Yeah, great question. Look, back when I was an athlete, it's really interesting. I was almost a fully qualified psychologist at the time, but I still think that I didn't give enough attention to the mental aspects of my training or of my athletic performance. I think I did the basics, but I think athletes get in this mindset of always training harder, working harder, not necessarily working smarter. And I think I mean, I competed in 2004, so that was a while ago now. And I don't think there was probably as much research around some of the things that I'm talking to you about today. So I guess it's been a real learning for me now in my professional life, learning some of the skills and the techniques that probably would have helped me more back then. I think probably the one thing that I did find very important back then was just having a really healthy sport and work-life balance, that you know, having other interests other than sport I think are really great. So sort of that diverse range of different activities and interests I think is really important. The other one is social connections. So back then I felt like that managing that high pressure, and even today with the stress of family and business, you know, having those social connections are just so vital. So globally, the strength of our social connections are probably one of the key factors to wellbeing and happiness worldwide. And I think it's something that we can all work on and manage. So not just sort of strengthening the relationships that we do have, but developing new support systems and new relationships, as well as even just the micro connections that we have day to day can impact on our well-being. So, you know, smiling at someone that you pass in the corridor or in the street, or having a conversation with the shopkeeper. The research from positive psychology shows that even that stuff really can give our well-being a boost.
Do you find that a lot of people are finding that hard to do these days, or they feel intimidated by possibly doing that? Because certainly research shows that loneliness is at an all-time high.
I think, yes, absolutely. And I think for people often say, oh, but I just don't have a lot of friends, or how do I develop those friends? And that's when I do talk about just those micro moments of just having those small interactions. And I think it can be challenging, but everyone can do those small things.
What do you say to somebody if they say, I don't know where to start with that? What's your first piece of advice to them?
I guess I would get them to clarify what their values and their motivation is behind that, and once they're clear about what they're wanting. Obviously there's lots of really interesting ways of, you know, joining clubs. We can use social media to our, you know, advantage in connecting people in real life, not just online, but and I guess developing some of the friendships and interests that they already have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today, Caroline. We've been talking to Caroline Anderson, who is one of our Women's Health Week ambassadors and a registered psychologist. We hope you've enjoyed today's Day 3 podcast for Women's Health Week, and we'll see you tomorrow.